Hey everyone, Heather Havenwood here on Facebook Live. Also, Raw with Heather Havenwood. You can go check that out today. Earlier this week on Raw with Heather Havenwood, I did an entire segment about how I just absolutely love the fact that not that Fidel Castro died, but the fact that entrepreneurism might be able to be sparked again in Cuba. I just think it's really fascinating. Feel free to go check it out. It's actually really good because I actually go through that back in November 2015, or sorry, November 15th, only a couple of weeks ago. The prophet, Marcus Loomis, I love him. He did an entire show about Cuba, and he went down there and he met with 5 different entrepreneurs. And so I go through the whole story, and I absolutely suggest that you go check it out because it was just really good. And I found it really the timing to be perfect, how the prophet went down there and he highlighted 5 different entrepreneurs and how America, we can't put money into entrepreneurs. You couldn't help them, which was frustrating for him, I'm sure. But also just the fact that these entrepreneurs were so willing to overcome so many different boundaries and obstacles that were put in their way to just be able to sell soap, to sell bakery goods. Anyway, go on and on. Go check it out, heatherhavenwood.com. And podcast. You can check that on iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. So I wanted to share with you a quick little strategy that I'm learning, that as I'm teaching people how to be a guest and do guesting on podcast, is that I really learned that I think one of my strategies and why I love doing it, but also a strategy on how I was able to learn how to, what I call, be in the conversation and be in the moment and be able to feed off of somebody else. And podcasting, that's what a lot of it is. It's not someone asking you a couple questions and you just going on a rant. What it is it's feeding off of them. They're feeding off of you. You're feeding off of them. And that skill is with improv. Improv, I took, it was a year of classes. I did 101, 102, 103, I did all the way to 106, and there was no more classes left. That kicked me out. And it's literally, there's principles of improv. Improv is a study. It's a way of acting. So there's acting, which is scripted, usually given a script, and improv is non-scripted. So Saturday Night Live is 100% improv. Okay. They'll have what I call an overall arc of what they're going to do. But most of it is like in the moment, improv, feeding off of the other person of what they just said. Okay, feeding off, they said this, and then all of a sudden a joke comes out of it and they think it's hilarious. A lot of it is because it's so in the moment. That's why we think it's so funny. And no one knew it was coming. It wasn't scripted. And of course, it was live. And all improv is usually done live. All comedians, their baseline, their foundation is in improv. Once you learn improv, then they say the next level of improv is comedy. And the reason that is because you actually learn the tools and the strategy on how to say something in response to whatever the other person says, even if it makes no sense. That happens a ton in podcasting, happens a ton in conversations where you just meet somebody 5 seconds ago and now you're interviewing them. So with that, it's called one of the tools, one of the strategies. It's called yes and. You may have heard that, maybe not. Yes and. So here's an example. Here I am in an improv class. They bring out me and somebody else, and they say, "Okay, you're on a ship in Mars. Go." That's all they tell you. Now, in my head, I had this whole vision of how it's all going to go. I'm going to be this, and he's going to be that, and we're going to have this whole little world going on. However, he spoke first. So he all of a sudden, he says that he's a green monster. And in my head, I'm like, that's not how this conversation was supposed to go. No. You're not a green monster. You're an elf. And he's like, I'm a green monster. So it's called yes and. So he's like, yeah, I'm a green monster on Mars. And I'm like, yes, you are a green monster. And I'm an elf. Okay. So in podcasting or any kind of conversation, sales as well. It's like, yes, you make them right. Yes, you are a green monster. And how do we bring that back to the audience? How does the audience view this? And part of improv too, because we're just two people sitting there, you have to constantly be thinking about the audience, right? You can't assume anything. You have to constantly be saying, oh, look, I'm I have a kettle in my hand. I'm pouring tea. I love tea. Like you have to really go over the top because you don't have any props. There's nothing in your hand. You have to literally, oh, look, I'm sweeping. Either be really obnoxious or actually show it. The point of this is what the tool did for me for a year is it brought me into the strategy of understanding how to say yes and always making the other person right, and then always listening for the audience, right? What are they hearing? Making sure it made sense to them. At the same time, listening for a break in the other person's conversation, right? So it's an improv. It's two people. They're feeding off each other. It's not a one-man presentation. So improvisation is about learning to feed off the other person, and also what I call handing them off something. So I call it a hot potato. So you say something and then you hand the other person a hot potato, either a question or something to feed off of. And of course, I highly suggest you take some improv classes, you understand all these techniques. But all these things you learn how to do in podcasting, because podcasting is not a presentation. Podcasting is not a one-way communication. It's not a webinar. It's a feeding off of each other. And I know that that's challenging sometimes because in this day and age, like right now, I'm presenting to you, I'm talking to you. And many times in this world, we have presentations, right? We have webinars, which is really another form of presentation. We have teaching, which is a one-way communication, maybe questions at the end. But at the end of the day, we're always in the control seat. And with podcasting or improvisation, right? No one's in the control seat, right? There might be a host who's kind of maneuvering, but the job of the guest and the job of the host is to always be listening for, making sure that their story, how they present is what I call landing, such a way that the audience understands it. The other thing to consider with podcasting is that most people are not staring at a blank wall listening to podcasting. They're usually doing something. They're driving, they're on the treadmill, they're taking a walk with their dog. They're doing something else. So they're not 100% listening versus like a TV they're staring at or a presentation they're staring at. So you have to really go out of your way to explain different things because it's only auditory. It's not visual. It's only auditory. And it's only like 15, 20% of their brain or their focus, at least their focus, because they're not 100% focused on you, right? They're doing other things. The kids in the back screaming. They might be listening to you. They're taking a walk with the dog and there's something coming at them. They're not 100% listening to things. So you have to take your time with explaining. You have to give spaces so that the other person can, have come into the conversation. And you have to remember it's not a presenting at, it's a conversation with. And it's interesting. The other day, I reached out to a company that does leadership communication. They have a podcast, and I reached out to them and they said, what can you offer? And I gave them a couple of topics around this, around the fact that leaders, their real number one job is to listen to the audience, listen to their employees, listen to whatever. Okay. That's really their job. And people don't respond well to being presented at. And I explained that to him. Now, his response was he doesn't want anything to do with it. He doesn't want to interview me. It was the first time I got to know in a long time. And I really got upset because I'm like, don't they understand that that's what communication is all about? Now, it's his podcast. He gets to say that's bottom line. But I found it really interesting that when I shared with him about how what I can offer is teaching people how to listen in the conversation, how to be with somebody else so that everyone gets heard, which is what podcasting is. Okay. Because again, you can tell when the host isn't listening to the guest, and you can totally tell when the guest is not listening to the host, which is very frustrating when I ask them a question and they get irritated. It's a dual conversation. We're having coffee, we're having a cocktail, whatever. We're having lunch together. We're feeding off of each other. My job as a host is not to topple on you, and the job of the guest is not to dominate either. There's no domination. It really is like a play. And so I find it, I just want to share that with you. And if you're looking to understand these tactics, I highly suggest putting yourself into improv classes. I loved improv. I had no idea what it was when I got started. No idea. It was down the street for me, and I told myself that I would do something different. This just something different. I didn't even know what it was. And I went to the first class, and I hated it. First class. But then I went to the next class, the next class, the next class, and next thing I know, I'm there for a year. And I absolutely fell in love with the strategy and understanding the fact that, I mean, one of the things we had to do, homework, right, was to go to professional improv comedy clubs, basically. And there's like a whole world of improv. And we would go to these shows. And I knew based on my training that they would get like a slip of piece of paper, and all they would get was, grandma's on the porch in Tennessee or something like really small. And they had to literally create from that. And there were sometimes 2 or 3 and 4 people. These guys were professionals. And then they would literally create from that a 30-minute play, basically, whole story that was funny, that was entertaining, all from a piece of paper. And I'm like, how did they do that? Now, knowing the strategies, it makes sense to me. But what I found funny was a friend of mine who's an actress. She's a big actress in town. She can't stand improv. She did it once. She hates it. She wants to be given the script. Like, this is what you say. This is where you're at. This is who you are. Right. And then she can get into character. I can't stand that. It's too restricting for me. With improvisation, you learn how to what I call be a person and then flow with the conversation. So I highly suggest, if you're interested in doing more sales in your business, if you're interested in increasing your sales, being a great guest on podcasts, being a podcast host, being an amazing speaker, and being an amazing listener or leader in your business, go check out improv, go getting yourself into classes, and you'll love it. You'll love it. I absolutely loved it. So this is Heather Havenwood with The Raw. Check me out at heatherhavenwood.com. I just wanted to do a quick little weekly Raw with Heather Havenwood. All right, guys, have an awesome day.